继续 Braid 时空幻境的周年重制版，应该是看到 Design 的这个4个人，暂时 Brian Moriarty 是另外别的什么游戏的开发者，应该比这个游戏的 producer 要大。这个游戏 producer 就是 John 是吗？好像是叫 Jonathan 什么什么东西。所以只要在这个游戏中看到 John，Jon，看起来像个女名，John 其实就是这个 Jonathan，Braid，看一下啊 ，Braid Game 是 Jonathan Blow，Jonathan Blow，Blow up the blow，Jonathan Blow，底下是看过了是吧？底下看过了，然后右边看过了，那是从这儿开始。对的，这全部是音乐是吧？靠，这个讲道理也挺难的。这里能用什么？什么都用不了，那怎么上去啊 ？Holy shit！ 嘿，嘿，哦，我操 ！Lock。Alright, let's have a look。2片拼图，能用什么？这个是绿色的，这个绿色的。哦，然后呢？慢慢的上去。然后这只也是绿色的，这干嘛来？这题目感觉好复杂。然后这个的话，一旦干掉，是不是就……哦，然后呢 ？So what？ Lock， 要把这个怪关在这个里面是吧？但你关在里面了，光跳你能跳上那个地方吗？呀，とりあえず試すか。这个下降的好快啊！操！啊，这个东西不会随着时间发生变化的是吧？你不管怎么搞，它都已经关上了。原来是可以这样是吧？这样的话就是这样，然后关上之后再回溯。但是你这个上得去 ？I don't think so。所以你需要一只上去，然后再把一只关进来，みたいな感じか。啊，そうか，我看到。这样了之后，然后，哎，对，这里不能回溯啊，行吧？对，过来之后，这边是要先这样，踩掉之后，踩上来，跳上去，然后再往这儿走。然后不停的回溯，应该能到这儿。对，这第一块拼图应该对了。然后的话，进来出来了吗 ？Fuck you, that's the first one。然后第二片的话，这个怎么搞？这感觉不能靠怪了。这个要靠那个地方了是吧？马哥，如果靠那个地方的结果是一样的。Damn。跳上来，先跳到这个位置，然后需要让这个东西往上是吧 ？That's not easy, mate. 我操 ！Fuck. Boom，来吧。嘿 ，get。这个是 lock 啊，那从右往左 in I， 你这 in summary 那不行。Why the game uses licensed music instead of new original music?
Let's talk about music. One of my favorite things.
I like music.
Yeah. So in the original game, you chose what they call in the biz needle drop. Rather than go out and commissioning specific songs, you went out and found music that you liked that you could license and licensed it. That's cool. That's how Stanley Kubrick worked for most
这
of
个
his
应该是那
career.
个 Moriarty。
Any composer in the world would have been delighted to work for him, but he chose instead to use recordings. And you did not choose that for The Witness because there's almost no music in The Witness, except for one glaring exception. But here you choose Needle Drop. So that was an economic choice, or did you consider commissioning music?
I mean, I probably thought about it a little bit. The thing to say before that is just, I was coming at everything in this game from the lens of, or the set of assumptions that, hey, I'm just some dude who's mainly a programmer and also has a lot of ideas about design, and I'm trying to make a game, and I want to successfully make it and release it. I don't know where I'm going to release it, and I had some definite preconceptions about how things work that may or may not have been accurate to various degrees. One of them was licensing music is going to be super expensive, and one of them was I won't ever be able to get music on the terms that I would like.
Legal terms, or
Yeah, like, so I want to make art that lasts a long time. I want people to be able to play this game in 20 years or 50
so
years.
you need perpetual rights.
You need perpetual rights, and my impression, which I'm still not sure if it's accurate or not, but back then it was, is that just as a small entity, there's no way you're going to get professional rights to any song you've heard of.
You mean
Because they won't.
any mainstream pop song, or just any music at all?
Well, here's an interesting thing.
Because there are companies that sell perpetual rights to, like Sound Dogs or many other.
Oh yeah, that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
fine.
I mean you can. That's plentiful, and then you
But
have full
okay.
control over that.
So let's go back for a second, right? Aesthetically, in the game, right? I'm going into it. I'm saying this is an art game.
确认一下。好，这个应该能够存档没问题。这 Leap of Faith 之前那边打了个58秒43还是58秒45，这个记录感觉还需要再破一下，这两个没问题。Aesthetic goals for the game's music.
Aesthetically, in the game, right? I'm going into it. I'm saying this is an art game.
This is an art game.
What does that mean? What do I want to bring to this game
它为什么
that
分成好
hasn't
几段
been seen or isn't being done or that is atypical of other games? And there were a lot of different categories of answers, but some of them are broadly aesthetic. So, for example, if you go back in time to older platformers, they have a very tile-based aesthetic because that's what you can do on an old computer.
That was
right?
their architecture. I mean.
Yeah. You have a limited amount of memory. You maybe can't even address every individual pixel depending on what kind of system it is, right?
But some of the handhelds, that's certainly true. Yeah.
And so that means things look a certain way. Well, now we're in a year when, that year being 2004 or whatever, when like those resource constraints no longer apply, and yet a lot of games are still descended from that aesthetic still. They're like influenced by it and carry it forward. So I was like, I don't want to see the same thing stamped out 5 times in a level. And for the most part, we avoided that. So one example that people probably usually don't notice, we've discussed this monster hunt level where there's little monsters on the top HUD, and as you jump on their head, they get X'd out, right? Both the individual monsters and the X's through them are all different bitmaps. Whereas in an older game, they would be the same bitmap, right? And that's a very simple example where a lot of people would just go do that. Like, oh, we need a HUD. We need to put 5 or however many. It might be 6, actually. But however many monsters there are. Okay, bam, 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 done, right? But I was like, no, I want to do this other thing. What does that mean when it comes to music? I didn't want
Video game music.
yeah. Now, okay, so let's say there has been good video game music, but there are different kinds of good.
这个应该继续一路下去了。Monster Hunt Bitmaps， 这看过了应该。
So one of the things about the game, we've already said,
啊，不一定。
want it to feel kind of painterly, kind of analog,
Painterly, kind of
expressive. It's not a
analog.
bunch of tiles. And
Right.
there are places in the game where you would normally traditionally just splat out a bitmap a bunch of times, aside from map tiles. So for example, 2-3 is the monster hunt level, where there's like a HUD on top that says hunt, and there's icons of monsters, and you jump on one and it crosses it out. Most games of that time and earlier, there would just be like a monster HUD bitmap and an X bitmap, and you just draw those.
Yes.
And in fact, if you look closely at that level, all of the 6 monster icons are different,
Okay.
and all of the X's are different.
Okay.
哦，真的。
Why? Because it feels a little bit better, and
Shit.
it's more in the spirit of the game, right?
Okay.
And so that is the kind of thing
还
that
真是
I was doing. And
Slightly
wanted to
different.
do, right?
Okay.
不仔细看你还看不出来，每一只都不太一样。啊，当然这怪是一样的。Not all. Hesitance. 啊，是吧 ？Perhaps in a perfect world. 怎么突然到这个地方 ？Not all. 看一下吧。
We've discussed the individuation of bitmaps in various places in Braid to provide variety and a handcrafted feeling. But we didn't do this everywhere. For example,
Oh.
the actual monsters that walk around, as well as claws and rabbits, all look the same as each other.
对的。
In these cases, the issue was just that each enemy is animated, and these animations consist of a series of many bitmaps. So to provide variation, we would have to do multiple large sets of bitmaps, which would be additional work and would also take more memory in the running game. We were having a hard enough time getting all the graphics done, so I decided not to push for this. In the Anniversary Edition, we tint the enemies differently to provide a small amount of variation. I could have done this back then, but since it's a small code change only, I'm not sure why I didn't think of it. Doors of one particular kind all look the same as each other, as do keys and gates. But you don't tend to see these replicated in small areas for the most part, so the sameness isn't something the player would tend to notice. In places like the cloud screens, the storybooks and podiums do have different variations. The doors don't, but the number counter that gets placed above them does provide some difference. In retrospect, we should have done several variants of that cloud screen door, though, because the whole point is that we lay them out in a line.
Lay them out in a line. 对，书的话确实有点不太一样。继续。Music in video games had always been a certain way.
Now, okay, so let's say there has been good video game music, but there are different kinds of good, right? Often good, especially the more historical you become, often it's about doing something unexpectedly skilled within the limitations of what you have to deal with, right? So like if you go to Commodore 64 and you have this SID chip and a lot of people are able to do a certain amount of stuff with it, and then you listen to a Rob Hubbard track on the C64 and he can make it just, the songs are just way cooler. And some version of that exists for every one of these, you know, up until you're just playing regular
Digital audio.
digital audio.
Right.
There's some version of that limitation that the musicians are dealing with, and it takes a lot of skill to do well in that, right?
Absolutely, yes.
But often those constraints also like starves things artistically relative to other media. So for example, if you were making a game back in the not the home computer days, but like the home arcade machine, like home console days, I had an Atari 2600, which, like couldn't even do music. But once in a while there were like a series of beeps in sequence that was supposed to be kind of musical, right? One of my friends had the original Nintendo Entertainment System, which could do music, I believe, if I'm remembering.
It had a synthesizer chip in it. Yes, it could do crude music.
But it could maybe do like one voice or something. Maybe
yeah, they
more.
all had machines.
But you also didn't have a lot of memory for the music, and so it had to be a pretty short loop. And so the typical thing that you got on those is like, there's a minute-long loop, and you play it while you're playing this level for like an hour.
So you're talking to a father of a son who was a rabid game player and developed a taste on his own, by the way, for
N64.
The N64, right? Which is a machine that had hardware limitations in terms of sound and stuff, and but even later games that didn't have those limitations coming from Nintendo, they continued that aesthetic.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean, right?
They continue that aesthetic.
We established that this is what video game music is.
Right, and Nintendo continued that aesthetic even into the Wii, right? Where the limitations. I mean, they had DVD storage. Now they had multiple hundreds of megabytes to deal with, but there's still. So having these games playing in the background basically all day, every day, it's like some evil carnival has installed itself in your backyard and plays the same songs all the way and won't go away, right? And
yes,
it drove me crazy after a while. The video game music, it was so repetitive, and the sound design too. It was the same, especially in the Mario games, the same sounds,
the jump sound or whatever,
over again. And for hours. And if you're not playing if you're engaged with the game, it's different because you're doing stuff. But if you're not engaged with the game, you're just listening to it objectively as a soundtrack. You want to blow your brains out after 5 minutes. Right?
Another piece of advice that I heard from some audio person at the GDC a long time ago is to judge whether your sound is good. Record a gameplay session and then go listen to it from the other room. Right? That's that's how you know if there's enough variety.
So that's the situation of most parents, is they're hearing it from the other room. They're not seeing the interactivity involved. All they're hearing is the same damn sounds being played thousands and thousands of times over again.
Yeah. Anyway, so I didn't want that for this game.
Good.
Right?
这样你就需要很长的这个音乐了。如果你只有一段30秒的话，那么你听5分钟就重复10次；如果你一段是3分半的话，那么只会听1次多。Keeping the jump sound small.
And so, for example, you mentioned jump sounds. The jump sound in Braid is pretty
我都不知道有 jump sound.
Sonically, it's like a little,
smack.
I don't know if that came through on the mic, but like I tap the table, right? It's like your feet pushing off the ground. It's not like boing.
Boing.
Right? Bouncing off a monster is a boing, but that doesn't happen that often. Right? Whereas jumping happens a lot more often. And so I made this kind of decision where I'm like, I'm thinking
早年的马里奥确实是声音。
People out there can, of course, have their own opinion about whether I made the right choices, but I was thinking about this through this lens of I know that these games are grading and they've sort of settled into this pattern where they decided what a platformer is and they're executing that pattern. I want to break that, right?
Right. Choosing music that would go with a personal feeling game.
So now when it comes to music,
长
clearly computers at this point can just play CD quality audio. And I'm like, okay, so that's what we're doing. It's a puzzle game. What does that mean, that it's a puzzle game? Well, you might be sitting in a level for a long time looking at a puzzle trying to figure it out. That means, firstly, if music is really short, it's going to repeat a lot of times. And that's just not really good for a lot of reasons. First, you get tired of it. What is music supposed to do? It's supposed to provide mood and maybe just give you a little bit of interest, right, in the sonic. And once you know what this minute-long track is, it stops providing interest, and it doesn't really provide mood anymore either, because it's just what this thing is, right? Yeah. So, okay, what did I want the music to be? There's lots of examples of what don't I want. That doesn't solve what the game should be. So what did I want? Well, I knew I wanted this game to be very emotionally unprotected and not there's a way in which you're doing a professional polished game or product in general. There's an emotional hygiene that comes along with that, in the sense that there are ways that it's proper to be when expressing things in the game, and there's ways that it's not really proper.
Can you give an example?
And that's subtle. I'm thinking of straw man examples that aren't going to be that informative. But instead of proper, let's pivot for a second to personal versus non-personal, which is not the same thing, but related. A very high budget game with a large team, which may also be causal, who knows, right? is very rarely personal. It doesn't tend to contain personal expressions unless they're from the person at the very top, but even rarely then, and usually those are fake, right?
So
Why? Because we've decided that there's this thing that these games should do, and it should
so let's use BioShock as an example.
it's been a long time since I played that.
But the creator had personal things.
BioShock is more personal than most games.
Yeah.
Okay. It is unusual. That is why he is regarded as, I hate the word auteur because people use it all the time in weird ways, but in fact, that's not even what that term means exactly.
No, it's not what it means, but yes.
But people use it that way.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's what it's come to me.
I don't know. And in fact, I'm realizing I don't want to go too far down this hole because I want to get back to talking about the music, which
All
was
right.
the point.
Okay.
But, okay. I wanted the game to not be very emotionally guarded and not to be like if there was a choice between being personal and being professional, I would choose personal
紧张。
because there's so much less of that. And the vision of art that I had for this game, it changes with every game. Like, what am I trying to do? But I felt that games were usually not very personal. And then especially in the platformer genre, it was like this manufactured mascot thing. Which isn't to say there isn't creativity sometimes. So, for example, I worked at Oddworld briefly, not as an employee, as a contractor, but like that, those games had a lot of character in them. Like Lauren made up a lot of like a crazy world with characters that were not really that much like what you would see anywhere else.
Right.
But it's not really personal, I don't think. Like I don't know that much about Lauren from playing the game, or how he comes across in person, or how he feels, or whatever. So personal was somehow something that seemed very rare in video games and was not really part of the tradition.
That's true. I mean, I think that's part of what the indie game revolution was about, was the emergence of
Personal games.
Yeah.
games.
Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, I'm a little too close to it to really.
So it's odd because, I mean, in the early days of making games, they were typically made by one person or a small team,
Yeah.
right? And you would think those would be very personal,
对的，
Well,
对的，
usually aren't.
有道理。
or weren't. There were exceptions, but
Generally not.
Generally not.
Yeah, and in fact, I was thinking a second ago about, for example, arcade games were very not personal, even though they were often made by one person effectively. I mean, obviously not the cabinet and stuff. But,
No, they were programmed by very small teams.
Yes, yes.
这里就是 personal game 跟这个 professional game 这个用词其实有点变，其实就是小众跟大众化。一些大厂制作的游戏，因为为了销量，所以一般都会迎合大众，包括现在搞的什么政治正确啊什么。这也就为什么近年这个 indie game 独立游戏开始兴起了。所以当你发现一些独立游戏 IP 往这个市场化发展的时候，其实就变味了。而这座 Braid 就很明显，这开发者不是说了吗？他想把它做成一款 personal 的游戏，而不是 professional。personal 就是把他的想法表达出来，然后其实是游戏来找玩家了。一般的这种商业行为市场化的游戏，就是它是求你被买，求玩家去玩，求玩家去买。而这类游戏不一样，这类游戏是你要去发现，如果你不发现，你可能根本就找不到。像之前我从来没听说过有这么一款游戏，就比较藏的比较深。即便你感受过之后，你也不一定说一定会喜欢什么。它就属于一款小众化的游戏，做出了这个开发者想做的东西。对，这个我觉得才是独立游戏 indie game 的这么一个初衷。如果你 indie game 做大了，搞了半天还是 professional game 呢，其实没什么特别的。In summary，
Anyway, so when it comes to music,
嗯
I wanted music that was of high quality in the sense that it really captured the deep and true kind of expressiveness that great music can have. That is entirely missing from 1-minute loops of platformer stuff.
You wanted real music.
Yeah.
You want real music? A rant about escapism. 这个是 A Conversation with Brian Moriarty。所以这个游戏虽然在2010年那会儿应该还没有这个 indie game 独立游戏的概念，但按现在的视角来看，这款游戏绝对属于独立游戏的典范。它就不是为市场诞生，不是为市场最好的诠释就是我花了大量时间投入在里面，你就不想把这款游戏卖好吗？这个回答不一定是这个直接的否定，但肯定不是绝对的肯定。更主要的是把自己所想的东西给它做出来，这个才是独立游戏的精髓，而不是为了卖得好。因为你卖得好，你卖得再好，你也比不过这个世界知名大厂。Escapism， 这是什么？
It is very easy when talking about art with a capital A to like crawl too far up your own asshole and be lost up there and never get out, right? And as soon as we started this conversation, somebody listening to it thinks that has already happened, right? But again, like there is value in all these things, right? Even so, I'm not a big fan, for example, of the very
Escapism，
concept of escapism.
逃脱吗？
One thing that I got taught culturally, and that I think people believe even more today than when I was growing up, is that movies are escapism and books are escapism. And the reason they're so good is because they let you get away into an imaginary world.
逃避
away from your
主义，
life,
逃避
which
现实的意思
clearly。 must be terrible if you want to get away from it, right? And I have never liked that idea.
I think it's.
But not because it's completely wrong, simply because it's incomplete. Escapism actually is a valuable thing. People have a hard time sometimes.
逃避现
Sometimes
实，空
they're
想。
so distraught or depressed that just getting through the next week, anything that helps you do that is valuable. And the world,
be it a movie or a drink or 3 or whatever.
the world is so big and there are so many people in it that the number of people in that state at any one time, in fact,
Right.
is a large number.
Probably the majority, actually.
So, from that standpoint, a certain amount of escapism is actually very helpful. It is one of the things that can help us live. For me, however, though, I think that if that is all that we do, if that is all that we use this technology of art for, we're kind of missing something because it can do a lot more. The way that I always used to think about it when I heard this escapism idea, which I probably first heard in high school or something, I contrasted it with my own experience and I was like, no, like I go to see a movie not because I want to get away from things, but I want to go towards something, right? I go to see a film or read a novel because I expect that the author has something to show me that will enrich my life,
主动跟被动的区别。
change it in a substantial way, and that I will come out of that I'm trying to find the right adjective. I wanted to say a larger person than I went in, which is certainly true if you eat movie theater popcorn or nachos. but larger in
A richer person. Yeah.
like understanding more, having a more nuanced view of the world,
Yeah.
a little bit wiser, and these things. And that pursuit, however it takes place, both on the viewer side and on the author side, is really what I mean when I say art with a capital A. And I know that different people can have different definitions. But to me, anybody trying to push that forward, even if they have very different ideas of what is meaningful than I do, we're on the same team in some way. And there kind of ain't that many people on that team, is what I feel like.
Efficiently packing and displaying hand-drawn 2D images.
There are two things you want to do that are related in 3D rendering,
3D
especially
渲染。
back then, right? Even though this game is 2D, it was running on 3D rendering hardware, as it
真的
is
假的？
still. One of the things that's very slow when you're using this kind of hardware is changing what bitmap you're drawing all the time, because I'm just going to say stuff that won't make sense to people who aren't programmers, but there's a very deep pipeline where the GPU is doing a bunch of things
In parallel. Okay.
And especially back then, much less so now, If you want to do something drastic like change what texture we're reading from,
啊，可能要加载
you
时
basically
间的
have
是
to
吧？
like
是这个意思吗？
flush the pipeline, wait for all the current computations to
computations
finish, and
finish,
then
yeah.
and it's also just slow for your program to talk to the GPU and stuff. And so, if you're going to draw, let's say, 1,000 rectangles on the screen, I don't actually know how many we do per frame in old Braid. Let's just say 1,000 as a number, right? That takes a lot of time. If you have to switch textures every single
每次
time,
你都需要等很久
it's a
的。
lot slower than if you can draw, 50 rectangles all with the first texture and then another 50 with the second texture and so forth. Now,
OK，
one thing that you often do in 3D, especially when you're drawing opaque objects, is you sort by texture. And again, this is a little bit of an older thing that people do less now, but you would sort by texture, you batch all these things together, you send them all to the GPU, and then you do the next ones.
OK，
Now in 2D, it's actually not even that easy because we need to draw from back to front because we have in this game all this translucency everywhere. Even things that are mainly opaque have, because it's drawn with a paintbrush that has a little bit of translucency at the edges. But also the look of Braid is that there's like a lot of sky pieces and a lot of particles and all these things that just blend together. And so you can't draw things out of order. There's two things that we needed to do. We needed to draw back to front, first of all, but then also as many things as we can draw at one time that have the same texture. We draw those in batches. So for a given level, that means that as many, like if there's a bunch of art that we think is going to be present in one level, we want to pack those into the same textures so that we don't have to switch them. And we didn't do like a super serious analysis where you could imagine like solving some constraint problem where you make absolutely sure that the things that happen to be in order on this level are definitely next to each other in the texture, but that would involve, some output from the editor.
Yeah, spreadsheets.
And then it changes when you edit the level and all this stuff, right? So instead, it's just more like generally, like look, and especially back then, because the art wasn't super high resolution, it wasn't that bad to say like, okay.
What res was this rent made for? In 2K?
So the Xbox 360 was 720p. Maybe
okay.
It could do 1080, but it was infeasible for most games to even
So
try that.
1280
All right.
720,
Yeah, we were targeting 720p at that.
720p。
And so if your source textures are 1024 by 1024, which a lot of them were, and if a lot of the pieces are rendered slightly bigger than 1:1, which especially the background sky stuff was, you could fit a lot of stuff in the level into a relatively small number of textures. And so we just sort of do that. And so the job of this tool that I made, which was called the pieced image maker, because pieced image was like the file format. It's like, look at the Photoshop layers, pack them into these textures, and then make a little output file that tells the editor, here's some name like, Rocky Platform A, and that is n rectangles.
An index.
Yeah, it's n rectangles, and these are the coordinates of them
In the texture.
in the texture.
Right.
But also then in like relative to some origin, right? And so then you can drag that thing around as one object, and it's like multiple rectangles. I'm sure other 2D systems probably have something
Yep.
similar. It's just like a thing that you want. And I'll say for people who don't know this stuff, the reason you want to do that, imagine you have a very simple shape, like a big L shape or like a corner, right? Well, you want to economize on texture space, and which makes the file size of the game smaller and also allows you to pack more things into one GPU texture. So you don't want to store a bunch of transparent pixels that aren't going to impact anything on the screen. But if you have like this giant L shape and you treat it as a rectangle enclosing the L, which is the dumbest, simplest thing to do, it's 85% waste in transparent pixels, in file size, and actually also in GPU time, because your GPU will spend time blending these 0 pixels with everything else. Right?
哦，这个意
And
思。
so it's a great benefit to not do that, and even more so on older computers, right? So that is all just to say that this format that was this, here's a bunch of rectangles glued together that you could drag around in the editor, was a thing that we developed in response to the art process that David was doing.
哦，这样会
And
更
before
快
that, the programmer art didn't do that. The programmer art was mostly just rectangle with a bitmap on it, and you could stretch it around, right?
哦，rectangle。
And so those are kind of very different things.
結構複雑やなこれ。Program related to the game's graphics. There.
Is your just quick test
啊，这看了。
There was a max,
is your,
as David did the Photoshop file, layers, right? Maximum texture size in those days, right? Which is variable based on platform, but we could be like, well, we don't want any pieces to be bigger than 256 pixels wide or something.
Redesigning an entire level at the last minute. Another castle. 这个
I try not to lock things down until the last possible minute, but with graphic games, it's almost impossible to do. That was the great luxury of text adventures, is that we could change major things up to the very last minute.
Well, you know, on Braid, I replaced an entire level in the last 4 days.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
You replaced it, or with
Yeah,
something
I
else?
redesigned it, and then David did the art real fast.
Wow.
It's the last level of World 6, the one with the cannon pointing vertically.
Yeah.
That used to be a less interesting, more complicated level.
And you decided at the last minute that it wasn't good enough. And
Yeah, I was like, I don't like this level. Let me see if I can do something else. And then I had the vertical cannon idea. And I honestly don't even remember what the old level was at this point. I just remember that. That was a
So
very late swap.
So at that point in the game, though, the process of building levels and making art was so well established that, you know, once you specified it, it wouldn't be, I imagine, that hard to make a change, or at least less hard than it would have been
No, I
earlier.
mean, you know, what the process looks like is I do the level with just rectangles where all the surfaces are and stuff, and then David already had the painting done for that world for all these pieces,
Yeah.
right? And then he just arranges them, and so it was able to go very fast. But yeah, like that was, I didn't change a lot of levels in the last week, but like
不可能有时间了。
a lot of people would tell you that it's irresponsible to do something that big that late, but the history of games is full of these things, actually.
I would retort that it's irresponsible not to do it if you think it's going to make the game better.
OK。
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, it also, you have to measure what is the possible fallout. How,
course.
if I make a mistake, how likely is it to be the kind of mistake that can be caught prior to release and all these things, right?
Right.
But this I judged, and in fact, like I knew that this was a ridiculous and or a funny thing to do with like 4 days left before we go into cert, so I wanted to do it even more. Yeah, good times.
I mean, I have many experiences, not with the text games, but with Loom, where very late I saw opportunities, but it was just too late. It's just I couldn't. You know, if I asked Gary Winnick for one more bobbin animation, he was going to find a shovel and hit me on the head on it. Right. So, and you know,
没时间了。
the clock was ticking, and the game
Right,
was
right.
over
Over budget.
and over time, and I had to get the damn thing out. So, you know, I had to let a lot of, I think, nice little touches I could have added at the end had I had a magic wand, or there's some art in the game that I made because I didn't dare ask the animators for it.
Yeah.
So I made it myself,
Yeah.
right? Because I had to have it, and I couldn't ask them, so I had to make it myself. Then I spent, you know, 18-hour days there
Wow.
because of that.
Yeah.
But you know, just it had to be as good as I could possibly make it. I looked terrible by the end, they told me. I was like a ghost.
Wow.
It was
这个就是
hard.
追
It's
求
the。hardest thing I ever did, I think.
It's video games, man.
Yeah, they're hard to make. So players, be gentle on us. We work so hard for you.
It's true.
紧张。Alright, last one. Speedrun. Technical hurdles on the Xbox 360 console.
On the Xbox 360, it was really slow to load things off the
这样吗？
so-called disc because it, as an Xbox Live Arcade, this was a thing that was different for Xbox Live Arcade than the rest of it. They had some like extra compressed package format that was, I think, only originally meant for save games or maybe patches. So it had extra security or something. But then the way Xbox Live Arcade was implemented, all data came from that. But the point being, loading data once you were running was way slower than it was for like a AAA game that you bought from the store. And so my approach on that platform was we simply don't load anything after startup. And so the songs were compressed, OGG format, but I would
OGG
keep the
format
whole thing resident in memory and then uncompress pages as I play them. And then the absurd thing is graphics were compressed. So on GPUs, even back then, you had a set of texture formats that the GPU is fast at decompressing. That's substantially smaller than the uncompressed bitmap would be, but it has to be fast for the GPU to use, is also not like seriously compressed, right? So the compression ratio is not great. It might be like 6:1, whereas JPEG might give you like 20, 30:1,
Depending
depending
on how
on
much loss you're willing to
yes,
tolerate.
yes.
Ah,
As it happened, like 4:1 or 6:1 was not enough to fit the whole game, but 20:1 was. So the ridiculous thing that I did for the 360,
Rather than just JPEGs and then
all the bitmaps are in memory as JPEGs, and then when you use them on the GPU, I uncompress them to completely uncompress, because recompressing them to GPU formats takes time too. And if you're doing it as you load the level, I don't want to do that. So it actually takes more RAM on the GPU than it should by a lot, because I'm trying to fit everything into memory the whole time. So that was fun.
这里讨论东西还挺技术性的。上这个是 Conversation with Brian Moriarty。
These are excerpts from an interview by Brian Moriarty, the designer of classic adventure games
Loom and
and
Trinity.
Trinity, among others. Trinity was an especially formative game.
Trinity 应该是文字游戏。
As a teenager, I had played and enjoyed almost all of the Infocom text adventures on home computers. These were my favorite kind of game at the time, and Trinity, I felt, was by far the best of them. It put an impression into my mind of what a game could be like that was very refined and deliberate in its artistic sensibilities. Many years later, when I went to make Braid, Trinity served as a guiding image of what I was trying to achieve, though it had to do this in a very vague, misty way, as the two games are very different in form.
Alright，像 Brian Moriarty 结束了，把拼图拼一下，应该多了2片。啊，对，这东西它还能转，还能转的太难了呀！这个应该对的。好，这片应该能拼起来，它能吸住喽？啊，能吸在一起是吧？哦，能吸在一起，那都还行。哦哦 ，This is wrong. Yeah, this is wrong. 确定不对吗？怎么感觉有点像？哦，这有可能是2的。哦，方向も全然違う。もしかしてこっちか？こっちは違う。先这样，先放到这儿，然后继续 design 下一段。Mark ten Bosch. Wow.
These are excerpts from an interview by Mark ten Bosch. Mark
Ten
has been a
Bosch.
friend of mine for quite a number of years now. I met him when he first started working on his four-dimensional game,
Four-dimensional game.
which he is still working on. He's one of the few people who really understands the kind of design that I do at a deep level, so it was an interesting conversation.
Interesting conversation. 这次比较线性是吧？也不是很多。好，上了去，把这边拿了吧。这个是不会随着时间所影响的，是什么意思？哦，懂了。Shit my boots！ 遅いすぎる。 遅い。遅すぎる。早く。早く。いやー、いやー。这好便秘啊！是。Piece of jerk. No, no. Shit my boots. Nice. Chamber. 会下来吗？不会下来是吧？这怎么还有可能是？
This level is new for the anniversary edition.
哎，
Toward the end, as we were tightening things up, I went back and revised this level in a small but nice way that seems fun to talk about here.
嘿，
Here's the original design.
有什么区别吗
Note that there's？
啊，
a
有个洞
hole here just to the right of the rewind exemption platform.
哦嘿，
That was there because if there's no hole, you can get on the platform and rewind to the beginning and then let go of rewind, which would cause you to be stuck in the closed off portion of the level. Yes, the player could go to the menu and exit the level that way, but this is bad form, especially when adding a level to Braid, which never trapped you like this.
原来如此
The。tiny gap on the left is there just so that the monster turns around and doesn't leave the tunnel. He stays in there to block you from getting the puzzle piece. And if he came out, you could jump over him, leaving him alive, and get in there. That tunnel is just tall enough to walk in, but not jump, because if you could jump, then you could kill the monster in there, which ruins the puzzle. If the gap on the left were wider, you'd need to jump to get across it, so it has to be tiny. Since I couldn't make the gap on the left wider, I added the gap on the right, which has to be inside the vault door, so that you can get out if you rewind the door shut. But I hated doing this, because I wanted the level to be focused around this room that is an enclosed space that is defined by one door or the other being shut. And adding a gap makes it seem less like an enclosed space. I tried a few alternatives back then and just couldn't figure anything out. So I gave up and called it finished with the gap there on the right. In the revised version, I realized that I could use a short ladder that you can drop down but not climb up, which should have been obvious to me before, but just
哦，
wasn't.
原来如此。
I positioned this ladder so that it's symmetric with the ladder on the right, and tweaked the size of the central platform to work better with the graphics that had been added. Then we revised the art to add a background for the central room to make it feel more closed. I am much happier with this revised level, not only because it better emphasizes the closedness of the room, but because it removes an annoying asymmetry that the player might trip over. You had to jump over that hole to get to the central platform, and there's a cannonball coming, so you have to worry about that at the same time. And why? It's just a dumb escape hole that the player probably doesn't even need. It would have been one improvement just to replace this hole where it was with the drop-down ladder. But it's two improvements to also then combine that ladder with the monster gap on the left. In doing so, we have turned 2 points of interest into just one, which simplifies the level and reduces the number of places the player puts attention. The more you can simplify the level, the stronger it will be. These changes might not seem like a big deal, but iterated improvements of this kind are often the difference between an okay game and a really good game.
再来一遍，这东西有点……
This level is new for the
啊
anniversary
大概我
edition.
懂了。
Toward the end, as we were tightening things up, I went back and revised this level in a small but nice way that seems fun to talk about here. Here's the original design. Note that there's a hole here just to the right of the rewind exemption platform. That was there because if there's no hole, you can get on the platform and rewind to the beginning and then let go of rewind, which would cause you to be stuck in the closed off portion of the level. Yes, the player could go to the menu
对
and exit the
对
level that way, but this is bad form. Especially go of rewind, which would cause you to be stuck in the
Stuck.
closed off portion of the level. Yes, the player could go to the menu and exit the level that way, but this is bad
就
form.
算卡关了，
Especially when
对，
adding a level to Braid, which never trapped you like this. The tiny gap on the left is there just so that the monster turns around
Turn
and
around,
doesn't leave the tunnel.
对
He stays in there to block you from getting the puzzle piece. And if he came out, you could jump over him,
所以
leaving
那边
him
有个小
alive,
口子。
and get in there. That tunnel is just tall enough to walk in, but not jump, because if you could jump, then you could kill the monster in there, which ruins the
对，如
puzzle.
果没有那个梯子，没
If
有
the
这个一
gap
个
on
洞
the
的话，
left
你
were
下不来。
wider, you'd need to jump to get across it, so it has to be tiny. Since I couldn't make the gap on the monster in there, which ruins the puzzle. If the gap on the left were wider, you'd need to jump to get across
这
it,
根本过不去
so
了。
it has to be tiny. Since I couldn't make the gap on the left wider, I added the gap on the right, which has to be inside the vault door
啊，懂了懂了
so that you can get out if you rewind the door shut. But I hated doing this because I wanted the level to be focused
对，
around
这么
this
看这关还
room
是有点问题。
that is an enclosed space that is defined by one door or the other being shut. And adding a gap makes it seem less like an enclosed space.
嗯，
I tried a few alternatives back then and just couldn't figure anything out. So I gave up and called it finished with the gap there on the right. In the revised version, I realized that I could use a short ladder that you can drop down but not climb up, which should have been obvious to me before, but just
虽然看起来
wasn't.
挺奇怪的
I positioned this ladder so that it's symmetric with the ladder on the
啊
right,
，symmetric，
and tweaked the size of the central platform to work better with the graphics that had been added. Then we revised the art to add a background for the central room to make it feel more closed. I am much happier with this revised level, not only because it better emphasizes the closedness of the room, but because it removes an annoying asymmetry that the player might trip over. You had to jump over that hole to get to the central platform, and there's a cannonball coming, so you have to worry about that at the same time. And why? It's just a dumb escape hole that the player probably doesn't even need. It would have been one improvement just to replace this hole where it was with the drop-down ladder. But it's two improvements to also then combine that ladder with the monster gap on the left. In doing so, we have turned 2 points of interest into just one, which simplifies the level and reduces the number of places the player puts attention. The more you can simplify the level, the stronger it will be. These changes might not seem like a big deal, but iterated improvements of this kind are often the difference between an okay game and a really good game.
这关小 chambers， 那肯定这样，对。这个真能做到 ？Fucking hell！ 啊，这个是跟时间相关的。如果没有那个洞，没有梯子的话，一旦你回到游戏开始，你就被卡在这区了。左边是有怪，右边这东西已经挡住了。要把这怪干掉了。This is definitely not easy. 这不可以了。好，有什么？哎，这怪怎么回来了？ Shoot my boots！ 等等，我都没看懂这个。这不就可以了吗？好，为什么他又回来了 ？shit， 那个地方是有一个大炮的是吧？ 看来这还没太简单。妈的，是有个大炮的，所以你必须要跟他一起进去。这怎么做得到的？啊，你还可以不踩这个的。Fuck。 这时间是不吻合的。血，这题目不简单。完了！ 搞错了，刚刚这个差不多应该已经可以了。这个就是一个 time management， 给孔面都塞了，差不多这种地方打开就行了。啊，完了完了，要能让他过去就完了。再打开去。这里要稍微等一下。这样就可以了。OK， 把这2个看掉。Stopping time completely. Phase， 这2个连在一起了。Impassable foliage. Better solutions at higher levels of expertise. Fuck you.
You have this option to pause time completely instead of going back and forth. And was that I would guess it was controversial to make, because to me it almost feels more fun to go back and forth and more about the time, but it makes it much easier when you can just pause it and
现在不是可以0倍速就好了。
It's also not very discoverable, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, the way that happened was just in the very beginning, there was just rewind at 1x.
啊，这样是吧？
And then you stop rewinding and the game goes
现在反正有1倍、2倍、4倍、8倍还是0。
There are some situations when you want to rewind a lot, right?
Right.
So that's why there's speed
adjustment.
But then also, it doesn't feel that good. Like if you try playing and just rewind at 1x and then forward at 1x. Now, the 0x time speed
0x
from, well, okay, if you can rewind fast, you maybe miss what you were going to do, so you should be able to go back forward. And then if you can go back forward at 1x, well, we should probably have symmetry. And then do you go from -1 to 1, or is there a 0 in the middle? And it just seemed better to have a 0 in the middle. It does make a lot of things symmetry. And then do you go from -1 to 1, or is there a 0 in the middle? And it just seemed better to have a 0 in the middle. It does make a lot of things easier.
Yeah.
But again, I think a lot of players don't get that.
I see.
You know,
Right, so it
it's
cancels
like
out.
Cancels
well, and it adds kind of skill ceiling to the game. It adds an advanced technique that you can use. And so, for example, there's one puzzle in the game where
这个下一关了。Impassable foliage， 啊，对，这个用0是很强烈。
it adds an advanced technique that you can use. And so, for example, there's one puzzle in the game where, you know, the plants popping up and down, and you're trying to get them in a certain phase with each other.
只要你让3只完全对，
because you can mess
完全
up,
抵押就
right?
好。
Because the extent of your time ring goes really far, right? There's at least 3 ways to solve it. You can do this very laborious brute force thing until you
这个是最蠢的方案。
want. There's a more elegant thing that you can do that's just a few moves where you drop the ring in the right place and you get the guys in the right sequence, and then they're timed so that as the monster walks, the guys go up and down with the right timing, right?
我操，这么牛逼！
Ninja move, ring
这么
in the
牛
right
逼！
place and you get the guys in the right sequence,
Holy
and then
shit!
They're timed so that as the
哎，这
monster walks, the guys go up and down with the right timing, right?
吧
The elite ninja move to do is just sync them all with each other.
对 ，sync。
And then stop time while they're all in the floor. And I like that because it's like, oh,
这个很
the
聪明。
more mastery you have of this game,
The more you can take on this
take
puzzle.
this puzzle that seems really hard and like have
对
an expert
这个
solution.
是
Many puzzles that doesn't happen.
解
but
谜游戏
when I
的
was able to do it, I liked it.
精妙的地方。当你得到更好的方案，当你的答案更巧妙，你应该得到更加正向的反馈，这个是一个关键。所以只有一个答案呢，有时候就欠妥，或者说你明明想出了一个非常聪明的答案，结果发现实际效果反而更差，这种也不是很有意思啊。不过那个也挺牛逼的，那个感觉跟艺术一样，上下刚好能 cancel out。That's something very beautiful。上得去吗？你确定上得去？不是吧？你认真啊？这肯定……哎，不是吧？啊，操，这好恶心啊！这好恶心啊！上不去了，操 ！Shit my boots！ Why is there a boss monster？ 想再看一个呢。这两个都周期性不一样的是吧？啊，懂了，你要在合适的时候干它才行，干的时间点跟它刷出来的时间点是有关系的。Damn, why is there a boss monster there？ 啊，这里在一起。
And I'm curious how you
Decided
decided
to
to
do a boss.
Honestly, so the boss idea, like sometimes you're just making a game and you're like, hell yeah, wouldn't it be cool to do a platformer boss? I've never done that. So the name of that
这
guy
看过了吧？
in the code is called Gun
Gun
Boss.
Boss.
'Cause he was going to be holding like a really big gun.
你却没
right?
看过？
Now he just spits fireballs out because I didn't want to think about like aiming a big thing around.
Oh
It
yeah,
just,
it
I
looks
didn't
weird
need
too
that.
in 2D. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. And then it just sort of turned into what it became because it was like, okay, how do I make this interesting? Rewind is sort of the player's strength, and rewind exemption is sort of, it could be a weakness of the monster. Like it naturally is that. Like, oh, he can't get his hit points back. Like, what? Okay. Like you could think of other ways to do a boss. Like maybe there's someone who could rewind also or something. But then that gets into like heavily scripted weird gameplay, and I wanted something that was just like a phenomenon, right? So the basic phenomenon of rewindability is like, okay, if you have a counter on something, that counter will not reverse. So if it's hit points, it just goes down and never up. And it's weird because like that's actually how most games are already. But in this game, it's interesting because it wouldn't have been that way unless we made it that way. Like it's very strange. Because if I just have exactly this level in a game that didn't have rewind,
那就是普通的关而已。
it's not an interesting level. Now, of course, in order to do that, it's like, okay, you would have to have more ammo to hit the boss with, right? So that's the other thing that's interesting is there's 2 chandeliers. The chandeliers, by the way, why are they chandeliers? Because I felt like I wanted in the game to at least do, there's the whole thing about entropy going in one direction and things, come apart and don't go together very easily. And I wanted just like a visual of that in the game because I wouldn't feel like the game explored this very well without that. But I like the idea of having something break apart and come together. And so it gives us something to call back to at the end of the game. Then, of course, it's like, okay, well, it's not only the boss's weakness, but it's like, it's also how you get more ammunition to fight the boss is by using rewind. So it's not exactly a level that you could do in another game, right? But it's just the boss's hit points being irreversible is interesting, even though it totally isn't in every other game in the world. And I don't know, that was fun.
There, shit, 没事儿。
So these are the 2 places in the game that have like HUDs that come.
这个看过
up,
了
right? So there's the
反正还快
monster hunt level where it like checks off the monsters.
Oh yeah.
Why is that in the game, right? Like that's the rest of the game doesn't have that. The game isn't about going through different modes. It was like, well, early on I didn't know what the game was about, and I thought that would be an interesting thing to do. And then as I figured out the game with the monster hunt, it stayed interesting because I was able to do something really cool with it in World 4 and tie them together, right? And that made it well worth keeping, even though it's weird, right? So with the boss, again, this HUD comes up with hit points, which we could got rid of because I put horns on him that fly off because that's the better game design thing to do or whatever. But then I thought maybe that's too subtle. So it has both now, which is redundant and maybe a little bit bad for the reason of redundancy.
是啊，顶上还有这片，右边结束了。这边还有2个区域是吧？还是就一个区域？啊，就一个区域，就这一个区域。Mark 10 Bosch， 这个是很长的，后面就不知道有什么重复不重复的东西。随便瞟一眼 ，Programming Jump， 居然看到了。啊。 这个是这儿是吧？这个就够烦了，我操 ！Fuck off！ 我操！真的假的？我操！啊，然后这里再来2个，这 part 果然不长，相当于就算是一个那个，对 design 的其中一个篇章。design 这里面分了6个门，这 programming 就是这感觉就相当于一个门。playthrough 这个都已经算看过了，这个呢？啊 ，playthrough 是这样的，是吧？还有这么一个标签，哎，难道说这个是一直有的吗？也一直有现在的。看一下啊，你这里面如果有的话就很简单。我操，不是吧？这么多，我去，哦，我 play 数的话，难道说你要一关一关玩下去？啊，这倒是有可能。Damn， 耶，这好像也是个天坑啊 ！Playthrough commentary 啊，这个是 playthrough commentary。Shit my boots 啊 ，Sound Music 应该已经稍微看过一小部分了。哇，这个还真天坑，可能真的是20下不一定够。还好现在还备了时间，这个也没问题了。啊，那可能就这样，这块就这样了。这个东西没准是在放侧面还是放上面的啊？像这种地方是有可能。我一直以为是这样的，现在看起来是可能是这样的。OK， 剩下的时间把这关时间感稍微破一下。Sorry， conversation。等一下啊，这样可以了。来 ，programming 并不算是太长，暂时看起来。这 play 速度这么长的，还得重新再来一遍了，兄弟。这个就当 speed run 练习好了。58秒4级，关键是看第2关的地方怎么样。那个地方太费时间了。这基本就完蛋了。No. Reset. One of the treacherous parts. 当你足够快，你能直接往上走吗？稍微慢了一点点。这肯定直接走是来不及。我操！不是吧？好像没破是吧 ？Your previous best is what？ 58秒47，这是58秒12是吧？好，可以，破了。Damn，这个呢 ，Crossing the Gap 这2个我记得有成绩的，1分30秒48，当时的什么成绩？看一下啊，68篇。Load this game， 47秒15啊，这差的不多，1分18秒9，47秒15，也47秒15哪看到可야바이呢？再干一个，啊，这个 ，shit。怎么玩来着？我忘れたんだよ。慢了是吧？好，这来得及。 50秒80。啊，那这个应该也不是难，可以，反正要求也不是很高。Fuck！ 哇，这个 play 数真的是要 play 一下。Damn fuck！ 完了，哎，这不行。直接跳下去，然后启动这个 guards 可能好一点。这里其实直接能跳上去的。来不及，来得及，来得及，来得及。OK。Let's fucking do this。这里就没什么可惜的，就最后这个地方怎么样打比较稳、比较快的？这样就太慢了。就这样，45秒。OK，Impossible Foliage 到后面说是 commentary， 这个尼玛真是天坑 ，playthrough 操，这感觉超级长的。那现在就简单扫一遍吧。Sound music， 你讲到了 design 跟那个谁还很长，穆拉托利，对，穆拉托利超级长。哇 ，Sound music 做的这么 sexy， 这什么东西？为什么做了这种？好，啊，这一关是这种主题。What？ Lullaby set word 2 What？ 下都下不去了。啊，这里可以下来。哇 The monsters。What? Piece of jerk. 3连发。血这里死路，真的假的？这能踩吗？啊，这是可以踩的是吧？够得到吗？好像够不到哎。那怎么上去？这里是要研究一下的是吧？怎么这把这设计这么复杂？啊，从这儿梯子上去，天，这也太复杂了。然后呢？这怎么上去？啊，这会挡住的。这真的看不懂哎。然后呢？你懂的？好像是没有。诶，哦，OK。操，这他妈哇！哈，这尼玛也太长了！Is this a joke？ 哎，这里居然有个看过的东西，这怎么可能上得去？也没理，这在木里了，上不去了，这怎么一个设计不懂啊？所以你搞了半天就是把钥匙等，这关怎么这么复杂？那这干嘛呢？这按钮都按不了。啊，是因为这挡住了，所以你要先把那个要把那把钥匙拿到之后，而且这把钥匙不能，这把钥匙只能往右的是吧？它不能往左的，所以这个门是一定要通过那把钥匙才能开的。开完之后，这个 杆子一旦动了，这个东西起来，这个才能过去，这个才能一路过去。不是这怎么设计的这么复杂的？丧心病狂了吗？你这 commentary 是让人来看的还是来玩的？都算是吧。Visual Arts。4本书，哇哦 ，concrete blocks。天坑这个词看来实至名归，这确实是天坑。对，你别告诉我这东西不是花是兔子，我操！3的真的都是兔子。shit， 这干嘛来？啊，他连到那上面是吧？然后这个是 last rounds， 每个 word visual 都专门拿出来了是吧？然后这个算是最后了。哦，那这个倒不短，但也算普通了。这 playthrough 看得了外的 ，playthrough 跟 design 一样，看得了外的。你需要一点看过去。像这什么东西？Playthrough commentary. Here you can play the game in a normal way from the beginning with some commentary. It's not all commentary that exists, as that would be too meshy. It's a set hand selected to be nice with a linear play 啊，那玩是可以玩，可以啊。这个当然可以，但不可能一口气打完，因为你还需要听这个 commentary， 行吧？ゆっくりね、ゆっくり言ってね。